Marlo really set the table for me in pointing out the absurdity of everything that's going on. So I'm going to just talk about what we really need to do with regard to energy. I stand before you as kind of a unique individual because I go back to the real history of energy. I'm probably the only person at the conference who actually knew Albert Einstein. I can't say it was a really deep and serious relationship. It was more of a nodding acquaintance because I was a freshman at Princeton University, and Albert and I walked past each other most days, I on the way to class and he on the way to his office, and we nodded. But as great as he was, he made a huge mistake in his calculations. He predicted that in 50 years we would be using fission nuclear energy. Today, the average nuclear scientist predicts that in 50 more years we'll be using fission energy, and I think I can tell you with great confidence, 50 years from now, they'll be saying they're 50 years away, so don't look forward to it. The second man that I knew very well really created the whole problem. He is Marion King Hubbert, a brilliant engineer and physicist working in the petroleum area, and I was actually working with him in the late 50s when he predicted that by the end of the 60s we'd reach peak oil, that we'd start using more than we were finding. And as good a physicist he was, he had zero understanding of the human brain, and he didn't understand that it wasn't the resources that would limit us, but it was the human mind. He did not foresee our ability to find new technologies to locate and develop oil, particularly and gas, that Isaac Orr will talk about in a few minutes. Cheap energy is the passage out of poverty. We need peak energy, and everybody on the other side that's trying to bury us, everybody that Marlo was talking about, does not want cheap energy. They do not want the poor in the third world to rise up and improve their standard of living. I call a spade and say they're just flat out evil, because that is the end of what they're after. Our amazing technology that each of you have in your pocket, a smartphone, makes it absurd to think that we need to have any environmental impact that is negative whatsoever in developing any of our sources of energy. And I'm going to tick through them and then tell you really what we need to do to open the door for this nation and the rest of the world to develop the energy that is becoming so cheap that the day will come 50 years from now that energy and everything we do is going to become a smaller and smaller part of our budget rather than a larger and a larger one. I'll start with nuclear. We can energize the entire world with nuclear. We have two main problems. One is that the government in this country has put so many onerous burdens on safety, making it far more expensive than other forms of fuel. The other problem is that the nuclear companies are quite dishonest. Most of them are investing in wind and solar in order to raise the cost of energy in their districts so they can get more money for the cheap energy they produce. Number two, they're trying to scam the states they're in for handouts to improve the nuclear plants or shut down the nuclear plants. The best example of that is the Exelon Corporation in Illinois, which is doing a great disservice to everybody in the state and actually to the nuclear industry in general. We have abundant coal around the world. Coal is just a phenomenal source of cheap energy, but because it has such a bad and really it had a deservingly bad reputation many years ago, certainly from mining mostly, much less from burning. But we can burn clean coal and have less contaminants in the air, but likely our use of coal is going to continue to decline. But gas and oil, anything that you have read about our resource in terms of shale gas and oil, in terms of how many decades of it we have, is wrong by a factor of 10, if not 100. I only expect to, I'm 79 and I'm probably only going to live another 30 years, but I do expect that we have natural gas from shale that will last us 1,000 years. Shale is the most prolific rock on the planet, and a large preponderance of it has accessible gas through horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing. We're not going to run out. One of the interesting things with regard to shale gas is, the price of oil has gone down, so that we're doing less drilling. And I will tell you that there are in the last 2 years, I'll say 18 months, in the Bakken shale in North Dakota that all of you know, we are now using exactly 50% of the rigs we were using 18 months ago. How much do you think the production of oil and gas has declined in that period now that we're using half as many drilling rigs? Someone want to shout out a number or a percentage? Right, the answer is none. Smart audience. It hasn't declined at all because we get smarter and smarter with every well we drill, that the production just continues to increase. Biofuels are ridiculous. Burning food, it doesn't really, the idea of burning food for fuel is really stupid, although I will say right now, burning corn has no effect on the price of corn. It was crazy when corn was $7.50 a bushel. Now it's at $3.50 and will likely go to $3.25. So it is not an economic problem, but it is really stupid. The Secretary of the Navy has forced the fleet to use a great deal of biofuel, and we just had some sea exercises off the coast of Hawaii where they were forced to use 450,000 gallons of biofuel at a cost of $27 a gallon instead of the $3.50 for conventional fuel. The Air Force has had planes flying with a biofuel that cost $454 a gallon versus about $57 for standard jet alcohol fuel. Wind and solar are impossible due to the laws of physics of the universe. You cannot harvest wind and solar energy economically ever. The day our Congress finally recognizes that they're flushing your tax money down the toilet in order to subsidize people making money on wind turbines and solar installations, when that subsidy ends, they will be gone. So how are we going to make the world safe for the cheap energy that I've described, the prolific energy that we are never going to run out of? The first answer is we must rein in the Environmental Protection Agency. I was sorry when Senator Inhofe finished his talk today that he had not discussed the paper that Heartland wrote to phase out EPA over a 5-year period and turn over all of their responsibilities over that 5-year period to a committee of the whole of the 50 state environmental agencies that do all of the work anyway. And there are 15,000 federal employees that spend $8.2 billion primarily looking over the shoulder. But there is one bright light on the horizon. Last week, Governor Scott Walker, who will be casting his hat in the ring for president, has adopted the Heartland plan of phasing EPA out over a 5-year period as part of his platform running for president. And I'm hopeful that he will be talking about it on his stump speeches for the next year. And perhaps then Senator Inhofe will take it up with his Senate committee. all of thank you. The next thing we have to do is get rid of all the regulations that have been put forth to stem global warming, to stop carbon dioxide increases. They are absurd. You've already heard, you're going to hear more the next 2 days, and most of you already know the Earth is not warming, certainly not as a result of anything man is doing, so every regulation we pass is a wasted regulation, and you heard how Marlowe explained the reasons that they give for it. The next thing that we need to do, and this is something you probably haven't heard, is we've got to stop picking winners and losers in energy development. We should stop the funding of any energy research, whether it's oil or gas or nuclear or wind and solar. Let the market decide what is the best way to go in energy development. So we've really got to cut off all funding for energy research. We don't need it. The marketplace will take care of it. We have to keep drilling. I mean, we're not drilling up around the Arctic area in Alaska, but the Russians are. We have no military up there. The Russians are likely to take over because Greenpeace is stopping Shell Oil Company from going up there and drilling wells. EPA is stopping them from drilling. We really have to take hold of the Arctic as much for drilling into vast reserves up there as it is to defend ourselves from the Russian incursion in that area. And the really last major point that you probably have heard nothing about because you're so used to it now is we've got to repeal CAFE standards. You all know what CAFE standards are. Every auto company has to produce a collective amount of cars that average a certain mileage. I think it's maybe 27 miles to the gallon today. It's going up to 35 miles to the gallon today. There is only one way to increase the mileage today of a car. I mean, the research we've put into getting more out of our fuel has been amazing. I'm driving a little car now. It's not an electric car. It's a little Hyundai Veloster. I just drove to my Princeton reunion last week, 1,000 miles over and back. I got 41 miles to the gallon, just a regular car. The only way we can increase mileage is by lightening the cars, making them lighter and less safe, and nobody wants them. With fuel down in a reasonable price and eventually will go lower, we don't need it. So we really need to repeal the CAFE standards. These are issues. I hope I've given you some takeaways here, a little bit about the history, a little bit about every single form of energy, where we're going, the optimism of it all. We've just got to cut out this global warming insanity. And if you heard me talk this morning, I defined for everyone that we're in the midst of Lysenkoism, where the Russians went awry between 1920 and 1964 by believing some idiot that thought if you acquire a trait, you pass it on in hereditary. It screwed up their science for decades, and it's just bamboozling science to get to an end point that has nothing to do with science, but is a bias for some area of social or political change. We've got to put an end to it. And I think the greatest thing that Inhofe said this morning is he saw an audience of 80,000 people. I travel the country talking to people. None of them are environmental zealots. They're either neutral or they're on our side. But I try to make them activists. I believe that everybody in this battle owes at least 2 hours of every one of their months, 2 hours a month, to actively fight the battle that man is not responsible for warming the globe, and the whole climate change thing is insane. It may be at your dinner table. It may be writing a letter that you know is wrong that's in your local newspaper. It may be calling into a radio station. It may be going to your kids' or your grandkids' school and giving a natural resource lecture. We need to be activists. You're all activists. You got on a plane and you came here. You're special. I want you to be even more special. Thank you.